Bonjour, bienvenue à la Maison du Canada. Welcome to Canada House. So we will get this presser going. We will have introductory remarks both from the Minister and the Secretary of State before opening for a Q&A session. So, Minister.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here in London at Canada House with my colleague, Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace. Today, Secretary Wallace and I had a very productive meeting to strengthen the deep and important relationship between Canada and the United Kingdom. Our alliance is long-standing and unbreakable. Canada and British Armed Forces have fought side by side in some of the most pivotal battles in modern history to defend the principles of democracy, peace, and freedom. These are not just empty words. These principles are the foundation of the rules-based international order that has kept us all safe since the end of the Second World War. But these principles are increasingly challenged by countries such as Russia and China, who wish to upend the rules-based international order for their own gain. And as the challenges facing Canada and the United Kingdom accelerate, so will our collective response. Thank you, Ambassador Vadim Pertishko, for being here with us today. I want to turn now for a moment to discuss Ukraine. We will continue to support Ukraine as it defends its sovereignty and as it has had to do for over a year now after Putin's unprovoked, unjustifiable, and illegal invasion. In fact, since February of last year, Canada has committed over $1 billion of military aid for Ukraine. And as we recently announced, we are adding another $500 million in aid to Ukraine. Canada has committed hundreds of armored vehicles, 8 Leopard 2 battle tanks, a NASAMS air defense system, artillery ammunition, and so much more to help Ukraine defend itself. The United Kingdom is home to the Royal Canadian Air Force Detachment in Prestwick, Scotland, which has delivered over £10 million of Ukraine-bound military aid donated by Canada, its partners and allies, using 3 Hercules aircraft. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for hosting this detachment. Through Operation Unifier, the Canadian Armed Forces have trained over 36,000 Ukrainian troops with the skills that they need to defend their nation, including right here on British soil in collaboration with the UK's Operation Interflex. At Camp Lyd, Canadian and United Kingdom armed forces work hand in hand to train Ukrainians. Canada will continue to stand alongside our allies in support of Ukraine for as long as it takes. Our two countries are both leading members of NATO. Canada routinely deploys Royal Canadian Navy ships under the command of NATO Maritime Command based in Northwood, right here in the United Kingdom. Today, I am happy to announce that His Majesty's Canadian ships, Shawinigan and Summerside, based at CFB Halifax, will be the next 2 Canadian ships to deploy on NATO maritime operations. The 2 ships will deploy from Halifax on July 3rd to join standing NATO Mine Countermeasures Group 1 on Operation Reassurance. This NATO Mine Countermeasures Group was established in 1973 as Standing Naval Force Channel to clear World War II mines from the English Channel. In addition to our efforts at sea, we are going to continue to be part of this high readiness task group with a long history of clearing ordnance from the seas, making maritime routes safer for all maritime activity. This deployment demonstrates Canada's ongoing commitment to NATO's high readiness, continued at-sea presence, and the Royal Canadian Navy's leadership on the world stage to strengthen security throughout European waters. This deployment will mark the first for HMCS Shawinigan and the second for HMCS Summerside on Operation Reassurance. Both of these ships have clearance diving teams and mine countermeasure search capabilities using autonomous underwater vehicles. Aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir d'annoncer que les navires canadiens de Sa Majesté Shawinigan et Summerside, basés à Halifax, seront les deux prochains navires canadiens à être déployés dans le cadre d'opérations maritimes de l'OTAN. Les deux navires quitteront Halifax le 3 juillet pour se joindre au premier groupe permanent de l'OTAN de lutte contre les mines dans le cadre de l'opération Reassurance. Ce déploiement démontre le dévouement continu du Canada à l'OTAN et le leadership de la Marine royale du Canada sur la scène mondiale pour renforcer la sécurité dans les eaux européennes. In addition to our efforts at sea, both Canada and the UK are leading NATO Enhanced Forward Presence battle groups, Canada in Latvia, the UK in Estonia. And last year, our alliance agreed to upgrade these battle groups from battalion to brigade size where and when required to protect our eastern flank. As part of these efforts, I announced earlier this month that Canada will deploy 15 Leopard 2A4M battle tanks to Latvia, as well as supporting personnel and equipment. Our commitment to NATO is ironclad, and we will always do whatever it takes to defend every inch of NATO territory. In closing, Canada and the United Kingdom share a deep and historic relationship, forged on the battlefields where we defended the values of peace and freedom for all people. Our countries have an unbreakable bond and an abiding faith in democracy. This relationship is resolute and will serve our people well long into the future. Now I will turn it over to you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you for visiting. We have met, I think, 3 times in as many weeks, or 3 weeks for Singapore and NATO, and now today. And I'm delighted to host you, and I'm glad that we managed to further our relationship. We had a good, strong bilateral session this morning where we discussed everything from Ukraine to the High North to NATO and indeed to the Pacific. And I think that's really important that we continue that strong relationship that Anita has talked about going back hundreds of years and certainly side by side. And Canada Day, which is officially the 1st of July, is also the first day of the Somme, and we shouldn't forget that 57,000 Commonwealth soldiers lost their lives on that day. Canada has gained 77 Victoria Crosses in both the First and the Second World War, fighting side by side on Juno Beach in D-Day, and even as recently as 2014, after the invasion of Crimea by Russia, the illegal invasion, there was 4 nations that stayed and trained in op orbital, and alongside the British were the Swedish, the United States, and Canada, the Fab Four, the original 4 who were there not at the time of the February invasion 21, but have been there since the beginning, making sure Ukraine can stand on its own 2 feet and help it with its capacity building. And I think that when I think back to the day of the recent illegal invasion, right there by our side, the next day when we had a initial donor conference, Canada was there on the line immediately, standing up for the values that we both share and making sure that we started the process that has led to this international community's response. And Canada's position is very, very important in that. It says it's not just a European problem, it's a global challenge to our values. It says it is a nation who shares the freedom that we both believe are important, and Canada has been absolutely a true and strong friend to Ukraine and a true and strong partner to ourselves. So I'm delighted to host you today, and we're happy to take questions, but there is more to do, and I know Canada and the United Kingdom are going to continue standing with Ukraine to make sure Russia is expelled from its illegal invasion of that country and return it to its sovereign right. And the message, as I always say at these press conferences to Putin, is the international community is going nowhere. Canada is going nowhere. Britain is going nowhere. So don't base your calculations, Mr. Putin, on the fact that somehow we're going to get bored and go and do something else. We're not. We're continuing to stand up. We're continuing to reinforce our friends in the east of Europe, in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and Poland. We're there, producing, defence of our people, but also contributing to deterrent. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So now we'll open up the Q&A session. I'll try to alternate between Canadian and UK outlets, and I'll take a main question and a follow-up if desired. So if you can just state your name and outlet.
Yeah, okay. George Grills from The Times. A question for both of you, firstly. Ahead of Vilnius, does both Canada and the UK support Ukraine having a guarantee to join NATO at the end of the war with Russia without having to submit a membership action plan? And how likely do you think that could be achieved at Vilnius? And if you don't mind, a quick one from the Secretary of State, I just want to give you the opportunity to respond to speculation in recent days, sort of linking the decision by CGS to sort of announce his departure fairly early in his tenure, to his sort of outspokenness on army cuts. Any response to that? Has he been asked to step aside?
Well, I'll answer that first bit, then I'll do the NATO, and then over to you, Anita. So, look, on the first bit, I read the report. It's completely spurious, right? When I appointed General Patrick over a year ago, he'd already been 3 years Commander Stratcom as a 4-star. He is currently, I think, the longest-serving 4-star in our armed forces, and when I appointed him, the condition was he would be doing a 2-year post. So there is no, I saw this ridiculous sort of gossipy report today that somehow there was a sort of, he's spoken out and he's getting, a shorter, not at all. That was the deal we originally made. It was very important. He'd done 3 years as a commander of one of the service's strategic command. So that's it. There's no conspiracy, nothing else. And yet, yes, as a general, he's made it clear his views, but I've made my views are in support of him, that the army needs modernization. And I noticed his comments at Russia about antiques or whatever, which is why he's got £40 billion for his army modernization program of his equipment. It's why, since I've been Defense Secretary, they've had a 20% real-term increase in their budget of equipment. It is why they have a greater proportion of spend in the department than they've had before, because the army needs modernizing. So by all means, we can criticize the state of the army that's been inherited, but you can't criticize that this government's determined to modernize that army and bring it forward. Challenger 3, Boxer, I fixed Ajax. Ajax is now being delivered to the frontline units to start their training. The purchase, very quick purchase of Archer to replace the AS-90s when we donated them for Ukraine. AS-90 was out of date. We needed to start the next process. All of those things have taken place under my watch and General Patrick's, and they will continue to do so. There are decisions around longer-term deep-fire platforms, decisions around, and indeed, I can give you another one, the Apache E grade that we've upgraded. A lot of money gone into the army. It'll be a very modern army, but it has to do that time to get there. On NATO, look, Britain's position, going right back to, I think, Bucharest, was that we believe Ukraine should be able to join NATO. Obviously, other members what was less than 30 then, but a number of members had a different view, and NATO can only go forward in a unanimous position, but we started the process. That's why we were there in 2014, partly to help Ukraine's NATO capabilities build and its capacity so that it would start on that program. I think it went from associate member, and then the next discussion was membership action plan. Obviously, Sweden and Finland didn't have any of that, and I think that opens a very fair question about should at Vilnius we just skip that and say that subject to other conditions, Ukraine should be able to come in and join. After all, they're going to have the most experienced land forces in Europe and probably one of the most heavily armed countries in Europe. I think we should absolutely look at skipping the membership action plan. But of course, we have to put some realism in this space that there are 31 members of NATO now, and we have to all move together. But yes, the direction of travel should be towards NATO membership, but I can't promise that at the Vilnius summit you're going to resolve those 31. what I think we could be able to do is remove more barriers for Ukraine, so that when this is over, Ukraine moves towards more security guarantees, more support. And right now, we are working in the United Kingdom on a range of issues to ensure that after this conflict, Ukraine is safer.
Along those lines, Canada and Ukraine share a bond and a friendship that is long-standing. We have 1.4 million Canadian Ukrainians in our country, and the people-to-people ties, the bilateral ties, run very deep. In 2015, when we started Operation Unifier, we did that because we wanted to continue to ensure that Ukrainian armed forces had what they needed in order to ensure a repeat of 2014 in Crimea did not occur again. And under Operation Unifier, we've trained over 36,000 members of the Ukrainian armed forces. And I paint that picture for you to highlight the strength, the longevity, the importance of the relationship between our two countries, Canada and Ukraine. And with that in mind, we are very supportive of Ukraine's work with NATO members collaboratively, and when the conditions are right, we will support Ukraine's ascension to NATO. Of course, this is an increasingly important issue. Right now, Ukraine needs to win this war. And as Minister of National Defense, my job is to ensure that the allocated funding that we've been given, now another $500 million on top of the $1 billion that we've already spent, is put to good use in service of Ukraine's efforts to fight and win this war, to ensure the security of its democracy and its longevity in terms of peace and stability. Thank you.
CBC.
Secretary Ben Wallace, with regard to NATO's 2% target that we consistently talk about ahead of the summit, is there any frustration at all in London about Canada's military spending? You know, Minister Anand has said that there has been an increase, but is that increase enough given the invasion of Ukraine?
No, I think the first thing is to make sure that we're all moving in an upward direction. Since I became Defence Secretary, we've reversed the pattern that's happened in the United Kingdom. We've actually had a real terms increase. We're going to top out at over £50 billion, £24 billion extra since I was Defence Secretary. That's an important, the first battle is the cultural shift. That defence is no longer some sort of discretionary spend stuck on the side of government, that it is in fact a core part of our defence, of our job as a government, and that's why I was really determined to make sure that we see that shift towards a growing defence budget rather than a shrinking one. You know, the defence budget in 2015 here was cut, I think, by 7%. We're on the upward trajectory, over 2%. Of course, we want all NATO countries to be above 2%. You know, that's no different. That was decided in Cardiff. But, you know, the Canadians, I think, have increased their defence budget by 70%. That's a significant uplift. That's the right direction to go. And I think, you know, it's for individual countries to decide when they're going to get to that target, and that's up to them. But ultimately, the key here is if we all spent our 2%, we could deter Russia and any other adversaries better. But, you know, it takes time also to grow armies and defence. You know, if someone gave me a cheque tomorrow morning for billions of pounds, it wouldn't actually be able to just spend it, right? You can't buy a warship in a year. You can't buy a missile in a year. You can't recruit and train another brigade in a year. It takes time. So the key for us as an over 2% country is to see that the direction of travel is up. Of course, I will say to my friends in Canada and in France and in Germany and in Denmark and in all those other countries that are not at 2%, you should try and get there. Because also, you know, the United States, as a big contributor, is quite clear that it believes that contributions matter. And also the United States, as we can see when it discusses the Pacific, is thinking about its liabilities. You know, America is on the hook for 300,000 plus troops towards Europe and NATO. I'm quite sure if I had that liability as a country, I'd be encouraging other people to burden share. So, but look, the direction of travel, 70% up. You know, a rising tide is important, and I think that's the first plank and very key.
Okay.
Alistair Snell from Reuters. I was just wondering if you had any reaction to the news coming out of Russia about general detention of General Surovikin, and if you thought at this early stage, you had any thoughts about what impact that might have on the battlefield in Ukraine?
No, I am, well, first of all, I've just seen, like you, in open media. I don't know what's happened to any of these people. Obviously, Mr. Prigozhin has gone off to Belarus for a summer holiday, and Wagner has dissipated. I think what I would say is, you know, from a UK point of view, if General Gerasimov and Minister Shoigu are still in charge, then the huge amounts of failure they've delivered on the battlefield will no doubt continue. And, you know, if it means Laurel and Hardy are still running the Russian armed forces and campaign, then that's to the benefit of the Ukrainians.
Well, my view is twofold. First, what happens inside Russia is particular to Russia. My focus is on Ukraine. My focus is ensuring that we're continuing to support Ukraine with military aid and equipment. Canada is the largest donor per capita in the G7 in terms of financial aid. We've contributed over $8 billion in financial, military, and humanitarian aid. My focus has got to stay on Ukraine's winning this war, and they are showing gains in the north, in the east, and the south, and showing incredible resilience. And around the NATO table, our job is to continue to support that effort. Thank you.
Global.
Global News. Has Canada or the UK or the Ukraine Defence Contact Group made a concrete dollar amount estimate of how much money you think will be needed in military aid in the future to help Ukraine win this war on its terms?
No. We have a lot. I mean, it depends on the options, right? I mean, there is a range of options you could do to help Ukraine. How much do you want to gift? How much does Ukraine want to buy? How much do you want to loan? How much physical support you want to give through training or troop? I mean, it's what we have examined is a range, and the problem is the range is vast. So, and also how many international partners you have doing with it. So, I think the key here is we have to make sure we support Ukraine's economy and that it remains viable. And all the way through this, the toughest task President Zelensky has faced is how to balance keeping his economy going with fighting the war. Because those are the two ways you can fail. Either the military invasion of Russia was successful, or the economy collapses and Ukraine then effectively has real other challenges. And so that is a task I don't envy, but you know, he's managed to do that. And that will obviously dictate the cost and the scale of the support required for Ukraine after this war. But there's no point me speculating on such a broad element.
And I'll just add to that by stepping back and taking a look at the actual process that these 50-plus countries undertake when they're around the Defense Contact Group table. What we do as a group of collaborators is to ensure that we are filling the gaps that exist in the military equipment and defense needs that Ukraine has. So at every meeting, we will have a broad-based discussion about what is needed at this time. And if you look at the military aid that has been provided over the course of a year and a half. It has certainly shifted to some extent, beginning with things like sniper rifles and ammunition for those rifles, fragmentation vests and food packs, and moving towards more and more complex types of military aid, armored vehicles, M777s, artillery for the M777s, NASAMS defense systems, and Leopard 2A4 main battle tanks. And so it's not so much about putting a specific number on a vast array of different types of military aid needed in the moment, so much as it is to suggest that at a very broad level, we are all committed to supporting Ukraine in the short and the long term. Thank you.
Hi there, question for the Defence Secretary. Sky News has reported extensively on allegations that the RAF discriminated against white men in its recruitment policy. We're still awaiting the publication of an investigation into the resignation of the head of recruitment over what she deemed to be an illegal order. But if the report finds that illegal activity did take place in RAF recruitment policy, will people be held to account?
Well, I'm not going to speculate what this report does or doesn't find. When the report's published, then, of course, we will make a decision about all of that. I mean, the Chief of the Air Staff has obviously given an interview to the media today about it. He's apologised. He's recognised that they did discriminate, that the 31 individuals will be compensated, and that the other point to note is that while the whole thing has been, I think, a significant error and indeed a cause for regret of the RAF, they didn't lower the standards. They discriminated against those people that were applying who were above the standard. So our military output wasn't put at risk. However, the treatment of the people applying was wrong, unsatisfactory, and I also think that the treatment of the officer who raised concerns and her very genuine worries being ignored was something that needs to be looked at considerably about why she was ignored, why indeed she was put under that pressure. And I don't want to see anyone put under pressure to do something like what we've seen in the RAF, but I have committed that I will be publishing almost in full the whole report, I think as full as I can publish it, and then we can discuss about what happens next.
Globe and Mail.
From the Globe and Mail in Canada. You both talked about the West's sustained commitment to Ukraine through this war, but how do you make that case to the public, to taxpayers whose attention is waning? If the cost of living, inflation in this country is nearing wildfires in Canada, how do you convince people that Ukraine is still worth the fight and the payment and the cost?
I can't talk for Canadian public opinion. British public opinion is about 72% in favour of Ukraine. It's not waning here. I mean, I know I've had endless questions from the media for the last year about waning support, but the actions speak louder than that speculation. The actions show a high level of support. Government itself is support, another £2.3 billion to support Ukraine. The direction of just look at the direction of travel of the international community. We started this whole thing with debates about whether or not we should put handheld short-range anti-tank weapons, and now we're standing here discussing Leopard tanks. We're discussing long-range fires. We're discussing F-16s. We're discussing, a range of weapon systems, storm shadow systems. So the evidence shows that the opposite. But I think if I was talking to my constituents in Preston, and I'd say, why should you support? Well, look at your fuel prices, right? Number one, Russia using energy blackmail is one of the reasons you have fuel prices like you do. That's why you're hurting under inflation. Secondly, breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine. When Russia attacked Ukraine, look what it does to the grain price. Your shopping basket is more expensive because of Russia's activity. And we need to make sure that is stopped so we can try and get back to some stability. And number three, Russia is directly trying to go after the very values that you and your family believe in. And if they are successful in Ukraine, he won't stop there. And I think that's important as well. Now is the time to realize that sometimes freedom is worth fighting for and freedom is worth funding. Freedom isn't free, as it says on the Korean War Memorial in Seoul. And what's amazing, and I can't speak for Canada, but when you go to the British Parliament or you go and see the demonstrations here, it's full of young people, It's full of the left and the right, who all believe that this is their conflict, their values under threat, and deeply value it. And I think, the whole of the British Parliament is in support. Everything from the Scottish National Party to the Labour frontbench, to the Liberal Democrats, to the Conservatives are all entirely beyond that. Now, I can't speak for Canada, but for us, we know what it's like to stand alone. We know what it's like to be isolated, and we don't like bullies. And we know that as a global trade-free country, we are susceptible to things like energy blackmail.
Across our country, we see Ukrainian flags flying from porches, flying from cars, worn on lapels. And Canadians understand not only the importance of assisting Ukraine in its time of need for the purpose of Ukraine's sovereignty, they also understand that Ukraine's sovereignty and democracy is our own sovereignty and democracy. That if we stand idly by and allow Putin to redraw maps and walk across borders claiming territory that is not his, then we aren't living up to the values that our forefathers and mothers fought and died for. And we must, therefore, stand shoulder to shoulder with our NATO allies and friends and partners in support of that rules-based international order that has kept us all safe since the end of the Second World War. I would say further that the Canadian government has taken very seriously rising costs and inflation, despite the fact that we have one of the lowest inflation rates in the G7. How have we done this? What is an example? Well, I have many. The Canada Child Benefit, $10 a day childcare, dental care, the grocery rebate. We will continue to be there to support Canadian families, especially in times of economic need, while at the same time support the principles of democracy, freedom, and peace. Thank you.
We have time for one last question. We'll go to the back.
Joshua, AFP. Just going back to the recent tumult in Russia, what should we be more nervous of? Should we continue to be led by Putin or without?
Who leads Russia is a matter for Russian people and Russia, and it's, as Anita said earlier on the question, what goes on is a matter for them. We can be commentators on it, but ultimately, the reality is the most important thing is for Russia to be defeated in Ukraine and the Russian armed forces leave Ukraine. And, of all the Prigozhin event, there's one part of it that is really important. And while I have no support or links or in any way with Wagner and Prigozhin, which are a thoroughly nasty bunch of people, he did expose the war narrative as false from the Kremlin. His video he posted, which clearly said NATO was not going to attack Russia, Ukraine was not going to attack Russia, you have been lied to by Gerasimov and Shoigu, Mr. Putin. There was no need for that. That's him saying that in Russia to Russians. That is the truth that we have been saying for over a year, even before the war, and that's coming from him. So that's quite important that the Russian public understand and hear that. But that's something, it's not a revelation, we all knew that, but it'll be interesting if the people of Russia hear that.
Thank you very much for
Daniel, you were going to ask one more question.
Given that there is a war in Ukraine, would it not make sense to have some continuity over who is the head of the army? I know that his post was 2 years, but it's not outrageous to extend a person's post when you two have worked so closely on Ukraine, delivering tanks, etc. I think
Look, Patrick Saunders is an outstanding and a first-class general. Right? He's brilliant. He has a great record, an operational record. He led the Strategic Command, as I said, for 3 years as a 4-star. He has now led the army. But look, we're an organisation of 240,000 people. Ministers come and go, right? Generals come and go. That is the nature of our armed forces. The fight against Russia in support of Ukraine has been carried out by a range of people. And you know, I don't think that, you know, interrupting the normal scheme of things would necessarily will make a difference. Right? Ultimately, I'm confident that the quality of the generals we have that I will be interviewing for the post will be able to continue to deliver the same effect as required. And of course, remember how the services function. The services are there to generate the forces to meet the tasks set by the centre. And the tasks are set by, effectively, the Secretary of State alongside Chief Defence Staff and the others, other generals who then carry those out. So look, I'm very confident that whoever were to replace General Patrick will be able to continue his excellent work. And I'm also very confident that General Patrick has contributed amazingly to not only the Ukraine, but the overall reform and modernisation of the army. But I don't think you should have a concern that changing him out on an agreed timetable already is it's not a reflection on him, and it is not going to undermine in any way our military response to Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the Canada Day celebrations across the street on Trafalgar Square. Merci, à bientôt.
Sorry about that. I did try. It's just they're on a really tight schedule.
No, I
now, so
understand.
they've got to go
Thank
to
you
one
anyway, I
section, but
appreciate
that's all right.
it.
At least you got your question in.
I tried my best.
What was the full question? Was it Ukraine?
It was about Lord Goldsmith with the Privileges Committee, so completely off topic anyway, and to which you probably would have. Exactly. Thank you.